He slices open an orange and prepares to celebrate the exciting race when suddenly an unidentified object flies through the sky. It resembled a shooting star and slowly descended towards the earth. At that moment, a nearby radio started making noise and a dog started barking at the sky incessantly. Everyone present stood still, their eyes gradually becoming serious. Just as they were staring at it without blinking, a rumbling sound echoed in their ears, unsettling Lee Abbott. It wasn't long before he slowly stood up and contemplated the situation for a few moments, and in his confusion, he called out to his deaf daughter and hurriedly dragged her away. At this point, everyone finally reacted and the thrilling game came to an abrupt end. The two walked down the street and just as they were about to head home, sirens sounded behind them. Lee Abbott went up to ask for news, but when the police turned around, he didn't hesitate to quickly get back into his car and start the engine. However, it wasn't long before countless monsters fell from the sky and continued to attack the humans. Seeing that there were more and more monsters, Lee Abbott chose to abandon the car. In a panic, he hurriedly took his daughter to hide in a restaurant. An old man under the table kept praying, and his fear almost made him cry. Seeing this scene, Lee Abbott hurriedly covered the old man's mouth. Immediately afterward, a monstrous figure hovered outside the window. Everyone in the room shivered as if they might become the monster's lunch at any moment. Unexpectedly, the cell phone on the side suddenly rang, and when the monster heard the sound, it quickly pierced through the glass and jumped directly into the house, launching an attack on the source of the sound. Seeing this, the father and daughter quickly escaped through the back door. However, unexpectedly, the monster did not intend to let them go. Quickly, the two escaped onto the main street. At a critical moment, a police officer suddenly appeared, raising his gun without hesitation at the monster. But in the next second, Bo Abbott walked up to his father holding a toy. Unexpectedly, the whole family showed expressions of terror. Subsequently, the father cautiously took the toy, slowly removed the batteries, as if afraid to make any noise. Upon seeing this, Bo Abbott displayed an unhappy expression. At this moment, the mother approached to console him, explaining that the toy made too much noise and could bring danger to them. The family gathered their necessary items and left slowly, but just then, out of concern for her brother, the sister secretly stuffed the toy back into his hands and told him not to make a sound. After the sister left, a smile finally appeared on the brother's face. However, unexpectedly, Bo Abbott suddenly picked up the batteries from the table, unaware that this action would lead to a disaster. This is a city overrun by monsters that come from outer space, covered in an armor-like shell that is almost impenetrable, and possessing astonishing speed. The hard shell allows them to tear through metal with their bare hands, relying on extremely sharp ears to track their prey. In this post-apocalyptic wasteland, humans have learned a different way of life, one where they make no sound. The family ventures out to find essentials, and in order to communicate silently, they have learned to use sign language to avoid making any noise. They pave their paths with sand and even take off their shoes. The entire world has almost completely fallen. Numerous once thriving cities now deserted. Some people have even sought refuge underground for survival. Soon the family returned. Crossing an iron bridge, the couple walked ahead with solemn expressions, as if their only reason for living was these children. Suddenly, there was a sound of a toy behind them. Reagan Abbott turned his head to see that the sound had come from a toy in Bo Abbott's hand. Without hesitation, Lee Abbott rushed towards him, risking his life to try and stop his dangerous actions. But just then, a monster was attracted to the sound and approached. Lee Abbott seems to be in a race against time, but is ultimately one step too late. Next thing you know, Silent Land is playing again. On the 472nd day of the city's collapse, Lee Abbott's wife is 6 months pregnant. To escape the monster, Lee Abbott continues to spread sand on the roads and install surveillance around the house. Every day, he sat in front of the radio, trying to make contact with the outside world. But day after day, there was never any response from the other end of the radio. To prevent the baby from crying after birth, Evelyn Abbott improvised a respirator and prepared a soundproof box. Even the wind chimes for the baby were turned into sponges. At dinner, the whole family lights candles, uses leaves as plates, and then holds hands and prays that the end of the world will pass quickly. After a while, the two children played quietly, when suddenly the younger brother accidentally knocked over a kerosene lamp. The father, hearing the noise, rushed over and quickly covered the fire with a blanket. In spite of great care, the monster's attention was attracted. Just then, a loud noise came from the roof. The father immediately felt anxious. When he approached the window to check, he realized it was just two small animals. The family was finally relieved, but the very next second the two cuties were about to leave. Lee Abbott spread sand on the doorway to minimize the sound of walking. He then said goodbye to his wife and took his son out in search of food, but the son was timid and refused to go along. On the other hand, The deaf daughter was very eager to go out for an adventure but was ruthlessly rejected by her father. She has to stay home to take care of her pregnant mother. In a fit of anger, Regan Abbott pushes her father away and returns home to pack her things and decides to leave. She believed that her father had been blaming her for her brother death, thinking that if she hadn't secretly handed the toy to her brother, the monsters wouldn't have been attracted. But matters had come to this point, and over the course of the year, her heart was filled with self-blame and guilt. Soon, father and son arrived at the riverbank. When Lee Abbott made a noise while catching fish, his son immediately turned around, ready to escape. Lee quickly grabbed his son, using sign language to reassure him that it wouldn't attract the monsters. The son was too afraid, haunted by the shadow of his departed brother. The trauma lingered in his mind, making him gradually become timid and weak. However, the father, with great care, then brought his son to a waterfall, encouraging him to gather courage and shout here. On the other side, after Regan Abbott left home, the wife discovered that her amniotic fluid had broken while going downstairs. Seeing that the child was about to be born, she hurriedly rushed to the basement, but while going down the stairs, she accidentally stepped on a nail. She endured the pain, covering her mouth with her hand, her face immediately showing a tense and uneasy expression. Slowly pulling out the nail, she quickly activated the alarm. Just as she was about to go back, unexpectedly, a monster suddenly appeared in the house. Evelyn Abbott hastily retreated and clung to a pillar, but she couldn't delay the birth of her child. After much thought, she could only wait for the monster to leave and hope that her husband outside would see the alarm. Then, she forcefully suppressed the pain, adjusting her breathing. But at that moment, the monster suddenly descended into the basement. Evelyn Abbott was frightened, staying in the corner motionless. However, the pain in her stomach struck again. She clenched her teeth, trying not to make a sound. Just as she was agonizing over what to do, the monster next to her suddenly unfolded its ears from its armor. In this critical moment, the sound of an alarm clock suddenly rang out. In the next second, the monster pounced without hesitation, seizing the opportunity. Evelyn Abbott, disregarding the danger, quickly climbed the stairs and went outside. However, at that moment, she suddenly turned around, displaying a terrified expression because another monster appeared at the doorway. Helpless, she could only hide in the bathtub, patiently waiting for the arrival of the child. Lee Abbott arrived at the doorstep but suddenly saw nearby red lights flashing, which meant that his pregnant wife was in danger. There was no time to hesitate, and he told his son that he must let him light the fireworks in the cornfield, for that was the only way to draw away the monster. Meanwhile, his wife was forced into the bathtub, making no sound at all. But this was not a sustainable solution. Seeing that the unborn child was about to be born, and the monster was getting closer, she struggled in the bathtub. Suddenly, a large hand tore through the wall next to the bathtub. As the danger approached, at a critical moment, the son finally arrived at the cornfield and quickly ignited the fireworks. Simultaneously, the husband quietly entered the house, then picked up a hunting rifle to rush to rescue his wife. At this moment, the bathroom light started to flicker continuously. Evelyn Abbott's breathing became rapid. Then, a firework went off, and upon hearing the noise, the monster swiftly headed towards the source of the sound. Unable to endure any longer, Evelyn Abbott finally shouted loudly. Following this, Lee Abbott rushed towards his wife, then entered the hallway and discovered bloodstains everywhere on the stairs. When he reached the bathtub, she was nowhere to be found. Seeing this, Lee Abbott collapsed on the ground, showing a face full of pain. However, at that moment, a figure suddenly appeared beside him. He quickly approached and discovered that his wife had hidden in the bathroom, holding a baby in her arms. Mother and child were safe. Lee Abbott hastily embraced his wife. At this moment, tears uncontrollably streamed down Evelyn Abbott's face. Subsequently, he embraced his wife and led her towards the bunker. The baby in his arms finally cried out. Instead of feeling joy, the husband's face showed panic, hastening his steps, narrowly avoiding being discovered by the monsters. Next, he settled his wife, placed the newborn baby in a prepared wooden box, and then instructed his wife to rest well. Currently, the monsters had left the area, and he had to find the remaining 2 children. Afterward, the husband carefully climbed out of the bunker. However, just as Lee Abbott left, a stream of water poured into the basement through the cracks in the boards, the result of unintentional damage to the water pipe by the monsters. Meanwhile, on the other side, Regan Abbott saw the fireworks go off and hurriedly rushed over, but on the way back, a distant light caught her attention. Regan Abbott crouched down to investigate. Suddenly, a monster appeared in the cornfield, silently approaching Regan Abbott. It slowly revealed the ears of its armor, carefully listening to the surrounding movements. But in the next second, Regan Abbott crouched on the ground, oblivious to the monster behind her. However, at that moment, a buzzing sound emanated from Regan Abbott's hearing aid. The monster, upon hearing this, instantly lost control, and its protective shell on top continuously opened and closed. It quickly fled in fear. Unexpectedly, the hearing aid given by her father saved Reagan Abbott from danger. Later, she approached the cornfield and was about to pick up the flashlight on the ground when a hand grabbed her. It turned out that Marcus Abbott had hidden in the cornfield after setting off the fireworks. Then, the two approached the vicinity of the granary. They lit a flame, hoping that their father would see it and come find them. But at that moment, Marcus Abbott accidentally fell into the granary, as his body continued to sink. In a panic, he desperately climbed upward. Seeing that he was about to be submerged in corn, a metal plate suddenly dropped from above the granary, landing right in front of Marcus Abbott. He hurriedly climbed towards that metal plate. Seeing this, Reagan Abbott didn't hesitate and jumped into the granary to rescue Marcus Abbott. In another house, Evelyn Abbott was suddenly awakened by the sound of rushing water. She looked around in terror, only then remembering the newborn baby in the wooden box. Unexpectedly, a monster appeared beside the floating wooden box. Evelyn Abbott, filled with fear, slowly put her feet in the water. Suddenly, the monster submerged beneath the water. Taking advantage of this moment, she slowly approached the box and then picked up the baby. However, at that moment, the monster suddenly emerged. Evelyn Abbott, suppressing her panic, slowly retreated, eventually forced into a corner. She held the baby tightly, staring at the monster with wide eyes. At this critical moment, there was suddenly commotion from the direction of the granary. The monster quickly turned its head and ran towards the granary. Evelyn Abbott narrowly escaped danger. After Reagan Abbott jumped down from the granary, she unhesitatingly pushed the metal plate towards Marcus Abbott not far away. Unfortunately, after rescuing Marcus Abbott, Reagan Abbott fell into the granary, as she continued to sink. In a panic, Marcus Abbott grabbed Reagan Abbott's hand and pulled her out of the corn. Meanwhile, after leaving home, the father kept searching for the siblings in the vicinity. Suddenly, a monster rushed out from the cornfield, and Lee Abbott witnessed it all. He realized that the two must be near the granary and hurriedly ran towards it. At this moment, the siblings inside the granary dared not move, fearing that they might attract nearby monsters. Just as Reagan Abbott was contemplating how to get out, a monster suddenly descended from the sky. In urgency, they quickly picked up a metal plate and covered themselves, just as the monster slowly approached. Suddenly, Reagan Abbott's hearing aid went off again. The monster instantly lost control, its body trembling uncontrollably, and reluctantly withdrew its claws before retreating. After confirming their safety, they quickly left the granary, and the father arrived in time to rescue them. But the crisis was not over. Lee Abbott suddenly heard noises nearby. He quickly instructed the siblings not to make any noise. First, he had the siblings hide in the car and forbade them from coming out without his permission. Then, he went to the cattle shed, casually picked up an axe, and cautiously observed the surroundings. But the next moment, a monster suddenly appeared from above. Without hesitation, Lee Abbott tried to kick it away, but the monster acted faster. Marcus Abbott saw his father fall, couldn't help but cry out, and Reagan Abbott tried to stop him, but it was too late. The monster, hearing the cry, immediately rushed towards them, smashing the car window and shaking the car roof. Soon, the two children's lives were hanging by a thread. At this moment, the father regained consciousness. He dropped the axe, deliberately making noise to attract the monster's attention. Using sign language, he bid farewell to them, expressing his final words. After that, he took a deep breath, shouted loudly at the monster. After a while, the two children successfully returned home. However, the family had no time to grieve. Just as Evelyn Abbott was preparing to leave with them, a monster slowly descended the stairs. Seeing this, she hastily raised the gun at it. But unexpectedly, the monster seemed to have a disruptive ability. When it opened the armor on its head to listen for sounds, a buzzing noise suddenly came from the nearby television. At this point, the monster panicked upon hearing the noise, knocking the television to the ground. Reagan Abbott, inadvertently noticing a newspaper on the wall with the word weakness, then looking down at her hearing aid, came up with a bold idea. In this critical moment, Reagan Abbott quickly pressed the switch. The hearing aid immediately emitted a piercing buzz. Just a moment later, the monster, about to make a move, lost control upon hearing the interference. Its long legs trembled on the ground, proving Reagan Abbott's method effective. The mother turned to her daughter, realizing that the monster was very afraid of this buzzing noise. After a while, it couldn't endure any longer, starting to shake on the ground. But just then, the cry of a baby came from the side. The monster suddenly regained a trace of reason and walked straight towards Evelyn Abbott. Seeing this, Reagan Abbott quickly took off the hearing aid, unhesitatingly collided with the microphone, and in the next second, the monster collapsed on the ground. At this moment, the mother and daughter finally breathed a sigh of relief. However, before they could rejoice, the fallen monster slowly stood up and directly charged towards them, with no time to hesitate. Evelyn Abbott quickly raised the gun in her hand and shot at the open armor of the monster. Unexpectedly, the gunshot attracted more monsters, but this time, instead of being afraid, Reagan Abbott, without hesitation, picked up the microphone from the table, preparing to face the monsters together with her mother. I'm a movie lover. Feel free to subscribe to my channel. Bye.